My name is Claire Whitman. I am 28 years old, a kindergarten teacher in Portland, Oregon. Until 3 months ago, my life was simple. Quiet mornings in my small apartment, afternoons spent with my students, weekends hiking along the coast. Then a single phone call shattered everything. My grandparents, George and Margaret, were gone, taken in a sudden accident. Losing them was unbearable, but what came next was worse. At the will reading, I learned they had left me everything, $26 million. And within hours, my family, who had barely spoken to me for years, showed me a side I never imagined. Before I tell you how far they went to take it all, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. If you believe in standing your ground when family turns against you, hit that subscribe button and stay with me. This is where it all began. The rain had been steady all afternoon, tapping softly against my classroom windows as the children packed their bags. By the time the last parent picked up their child, the world outside was dark and slick with puddles. I locked the door, gathered my lesson plans, and started the short walk to my car, thinking about the soup I would make for dinner. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the number made me pause. It was from a local hospital. "Is this Claire Whitman?" The voice on the other end was steady but carried a weight that made my chest tighten. "Yes," I said. "I am sorry to inform you. There has been an accident." For a moment I could not breathe. They said the names. George and Margaret Whitman. My grandparents. The only people who had ever made me feel truly safe. The officer's words blurred together. Intersection, drunk driver. Instant. I heard myself saying thank you, my voice sounding distant and mechanical. I drove home in silence, the windshield wipers a slow metronome marking the seconds between reality and disbelief. My small apartment felt foreign when I stepped inside, like I had walked into someone else's life. I sat on the couch, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold before I took a sip. 2 days later, the funeral was a blur of black coats and polite murmurs. My parents, Edward and Linda, moved through the crowd like hosts at a business luncheon, shaking hands and offering rehearsed condolences. My brother Ryan arrived late, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. My Aunt Elaine cried loudly enough to draw glances, but stopped as soon as the cameras from her friends' phones lowered. My Uncle Martin stood in the corner, eyes lowered, hands clasped like he wished he could disappear. I stood apart, watching, feeling the strange emptiness of losing the only real family I had. Their house, warm, filled with the smell of my grandmother's baking, was now just a silent shell. I could not bring myself to step inside. After the burial, relatives and acquaintances came up to me, offering soft condolences. Most were polite, a few genuine. But I caught the glances. Measured, assessing, almost calculating. It was as if my grandparents' deaths had already shifted something in their minds, something they were too polite to say out loud. The week passed in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet moments where I forgot they were gone, only to remember again with a jolt. Then came the call from Samuel Brooks, my grandparents' attorney. His voice was low and deliberate. "Claire, we will be reading your grandparents' will next Tuesday morning. I need you and your immediate family here." I agreed, but as soon as I hung up, a tight unease settled in my stomach. I knew my grandparents had built something substantial over their lifetime, though they never flaunted it. I also knew how my father and aunt thought about money, and how they reacted to anything that didn't go their way. The night before the reading, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering all the summers I had spent at their house, the vegetable garden my grandfather tended, the way my grandmother hummed as she baked pies. They had always told me that money was just a tool, and that what mattered was using it to build a good life, not to show it off. On the morning of the will reading, the city was wrapped in a thin fog. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching the black umbrella my grandmother had once insisted I keep in my car. The office was in a restored Victorian house, the kind with polished wood floors and the faint smell of old books. Samuel greeted me with kind eyes and a handshake that lingered just long enough to offer comfort. "Your grandparents spoke very highly of you, Claire," he said quietly. "Thank you," I replied, my voice catching. We were making small talk when the door swung open and my family arrived. Edward strode in first, checking his watch like the meeting was already wasting his time. Linda followed, her designer handbag swinging from her wrist, her eyes scanning the room with quiet judgment. Ryan trailed behind, his shirt wrinkled, his sunglasses still in place, a smirk tugging at his lips. Elaine's voice carried into the hallway as she complained to someone on the phone, Martin trailing after her like a shadow. My father's words cut through the air. "Let's get this over with. Some of us have real work to do." Samuel's polite smile did not waver as he led us into the conference room. The tension was sharp enough to taste. The long oak table gleamed under the soft light from the chandelier. My father took the seat at the far end, claiming the position of authority without saying a word. My mother sat beside him, leaning back in her chair as though she were presiding over a meeting she had already decided the outcome of. Ryan sprawled into his seat with an exaggerated sigh. Elaine sat next to him, crossing her arms, while Martin chose the farthest chair as if hoping not to be noticed. Samuel opened a leather portfolio and adjusted his glasses. "Before we begin, I want to state for the record that George and Margaret Whitman were of sound mind when they finalized this will. Their decisions were deliberate and informed." My father snorted. "Just read it, Sam. We all know how this goes." Samuel's voice was steady. "To our beloved granddaughter Claire Whitman, we leave our entire estate, including all cash assets, investments, real estate, and our ownership stake in Whitman Logistics." The words seemed to echo in the air. My hands froze in my lap. I thought I had misheard him. Samuel continued, "We specifically and intentionally make no provisions for our son Edward Whitman, our daughter-in-law Linda Whitman, our grandson Ryan Whitman, our daughter Elaine Carter, or our son-in-law Martin Carter, as we have provided for them during our lifetime." The room exploded into noise. My father's chair scraped against the floor as he stood so fast it nearly toppled. He snatched the document from Samuel's hands, scanning it with frantic eyes. My mother leaned forward, her voice sharp. 26 million to a kindergarten teacher. She wouldn't know the first thing about handling that kind of money. Ryan slammed his hand on the table. "What about me? I'm family too. I have business ventures that could use that capital." Elaine's face flushed red. "What did you do, Claire? How did you manipulate them into this?" I sat in stunned silence, my mind spinning. My grandparents had always been generous, but I never imagined they would leave everything to me. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't even thought about it. Samuel's voice cut through the noise. "If you will all please take your seats, there is more." He pressed a button on a remote, and a large screen on the wall lit up. My grandparents appeared, sitting side by side on their living room sofa. My breath caught. They looked exactly as they had the last time I saw them. My grandfather in his worn cardigan, my grandmother's hands folded neatly in her lap. "If you are watching this," my grandfather began, "it means we have passed on. We want to explain our decisions clearly." My grandmother's eyes were kind but unwavering. "Edward, Elaine, we love you as our children, but we have been deeply disappointed by the choices you have made and the values you have embraced." The message continued, recounting years of missed events, requests for money never repaid, and their refusal to support reckless ventures. They spoke of the values they had built their lives on, integrity, hard work, and genuine relationships, and said that I was the only one who had shown those values consistently. My grandfather's voice was firm. "Claire visits because she cares, not because she wants something. She will honor our legacy." As the video ended, the silence was heavier than before. I could feel every set of eyes on me, some burning with anger, others calculating their next move. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. The video screen faded to black, leaving a strange stillness in the room. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. I could feel my father's eyes on me, cold and unblinking. My mother's hands rested on the polished table, her nails tapping slowly, a rhythm that felt more like a warning than a habit. Samuel calmly closed the leather portfolio and folded his hands. That concludes the formal reading of the will. If there are no questions— Oh, there are questions, my father cut in sharply. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low but brimming with controlled fury. Claire, you understand this is absurd. $26 million in the hands of someone who spends her days singing alphabet songs and cutting construction paper. You wouldn't know how to manage a quarter of that. My mother's tone shifted to a mock softness. Sweetheart, your grandparents were confused. They meant for the family to benefit from what they built, not just you. Of course you'll share it with us. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Ryan pushed his chair back with a loud scrape. We can skip the polite act. I got a pitch ready. My cryptocurrency platform is going to blow up if I can just get the seed funding. $5 million should be enough to. Samuel raised a hand. Let's be clear. Your grandparents' wishes are legally binding. They have been documented with extensive evidence, including medical evaluations of their mental capacity. Contesting this will would be an expensive and likely futile endeavor. My Aunt Elaine crossed her arms, her voice sharp. So you're telling us we just walk away? After everything we've done for this family? I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to ask her what exactly she thought she'd done, considering she hadn't seen my grandparents outside of holidays in years. My father pushed back from the table, standing to his full height. We'll discuss this later, Claire. As a family, without outsiders present. Samuel's eyes flicked toward me, and I saw the faintest shake of his head. He was warning me to tread carefully. The meeting dissolved in a mess of muttered threats and stiff goodbyes. As we filed out into the hallway, my father gripped my arm, his fingers pressing into my sleeve. Come to our house tonight. 6 o'clock. We're sorting this out. The words weren't a request. His tone was one I recognized from my childhood, when he'd decided what would happen and dared anyone to challenge him. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Outside, the sky had grown heavier with clouds, the air damp with the promise of more rain. I walked to my car, feeling the weight of the envelope Samuel had slipped into my bag. A packet of documents, keys, and instructions. I sat for a moment before starting the engine, staring at the raindrops gathering on the windshield. The drive to my apartment was a blur. Once inside, I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter and stared at the clock. It was just past 3. 3 hours until I walked into whatever trap my family was setting. I tried to distract myself, washed the dishes in the sink, folded laundry, even swept the kitchen floor. But my mind kept circling back to the way they had looked at me in that conference room. Not as family, but as an obstacle standing between them and what they wanted. When the clock neared 5:45, I pulled on my coat, grabbed the envelope from the counter, and headed out. The streets glistened with rain under the dim streetlights, the world outside my windshield blurring into shades of gray. Their house loomed large as I pulled into the driveway, all stone and glass, built to impress rather than welcome. The lights were on in the front rooms, casting warm glows that felt anything but inviting. Inside they were waiting. My father stood by the fireplace, a tumbler of amber liquid in hand. My mother perched on the edge of a sleek white armchair, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Ryan was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, while Elaine paced in the corner, muttering under her breath. Martin stood near the window, gaze fixed outside like he wanted no part of this. Sit down, Claire, my father said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I sat, setting the envelope on my lap. He launched into his pitch immediately, his voice smooth like a practiced negotiator. You know your grandparents weren't thinking clearly. They meant for the family to share this. We can make this simple. You sign over the estate to me as the financial head of the family, and I'll ensure everyone gets their fair share. You'll get 10%. More than enough for your needs. I stared at him, the number ringing in my ears. 10% of what they left me. Ryan grinned. That's still over $2 million. More than enough for a teacher. Elaine chimed in. And the house should go to us. My kids need access to better schools, and that neighborhood is perfect. Their voices blended together, a chorus of demands and justifications. No one asked what I wanted. No one mentioned my grandparents' wishes. The envelope felt heavier in my lap, like a reminder. I drew in a slow breath. "No," I said finally. The room fell silent. My father's eyes narrowed. "What did you just say?" "I'm not signing anything," I said. "My grandparents trusted me with their legacy. I'm going to honor that." The calm in my voice surprised even me. My mother's face hardened. Ryan muttered something under his breath. Elaine's eyes filled with mock tears. My father's jaw clenched, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You either sign that paper tonight or you take your precious inheritance and consider yourself disowned." The weight of the moment pressed down on me, but something in me refused to break. I set the envelope on the coffee table, stood up, and met his stare. "Then I guess we're done here." I turned toward the door, but his voice followed me, sharp and cold. "We own your building, Claire. You have 30 minutes to pack before the locks are changed." And just like that, the room tilted. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The words hung in the air like smoke, twisting and heavy. "What?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. My father didn't blink. "The building your apartment is in. We own it through one of our companies. You have 30 minutes to pack what you need. The locks will be changed in the morning." My mother glanced at her watch. "Actually, we'll change them tonight. Best to make a clean break." Ryan leaned back on the sofa, a smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. "Better hurry, sis. 2 million won't keep you warm when you're sleeping in your car." I stood frozen, the reality sinking in. They were doing this, not threatening, not bluffing, doing it. Over money they hadn't earned. Over something they thought belonged to them by right. No matter what my grandparents had decided. My father moved to the doorway, crossing his arms like a guard blocking an exit. "You can go now, Claire." Clocks ticking. My Aunt Elaine stepped closer, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "I hope you're proud of yourself. All that money and nowhere to go." I walked past them without another word, my shoes clicking against the marble floor. Outside, the air was cold and damp, the wind cutting through my coat. The driveway glistened under the glow of the porch lights as I climbed into my car. The drive to my apartment felt unreal. I pulled into the small parking lot, my headlights sweeping across the familiar facade. I hurried upstairs, unlocking the door to the little space I had called home for 3 years. The ticking of the kitchen clock felt louder than usual as I grabbed a duffel from the closet. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, important documents. Everything went into bags with mechanical precision. I paused in the bedroom, staring at the quilt folded at the foot of the bed. My grandmother had made it the winter I moved here, each stitch neat and deliberate. I stuffed it into the bag, my throat tightening. Halfway through packing, a shadow moved past my window. Froze. 3 sharp knocks sounded at the door. "Claire, it's Martin." I opened the door to find my uncle standing there, hands shoved in his coat pockets. He glanced over his shoulder before speaking in a low voice. "I don't agree with this, but I can't stop them. Just be careful tonight." "Thanks," I said, though my voice was barely above a whisper. He nodded once, then turned and walked down the hall, disappearing into the stairwell. I zipped the last bag and looked around. So much was left behind. Books, framed photos, little pieces of a life that wouldn't fit into 4 bags. Downstairs, my father's car idled at the curb, the engine rumbling like an impatient warning. I carried my bags to the trunk, avoiding his gaze. "Is that everything?" he asked. "For now." "Good. You won't be coming back." I closed the trunk without answering and got behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and I drove off without looking back. Once I was on the road, the question of where to go loomed larger with every mile. I couldn't afford a hotel without a big hold on my card. Friends were an option, but explaining this at nearly midnight seemed impossible. Then I remembered the envelope Samuel had given me. At a red light, I reached into my bag and pulled it out. Inside was a stack of documents, a key ring with several brass keys, and a small rabbit-shaped keychain I hadn't seen in years. My grandmother's. My grandparents' house. The thought made my chest ache, but it was the only place that made sense. The streets were quiet as I drove there, the rain now a fine mist against the windshield. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on, casting a warm circle of light on the front steps. For a long moment I just sat there, staring at the front door. Part of me expected to see my grandfather step out onto the porch, waving me inside. Finally I got out, grabbing one bag and walking to the door. The key slid into the lock with a soft click, and the door swung open to the familiar scent of lemon verbena and polished wood. I flipped on the lights, half expecting to hear voices from the kitchen. The silence was deep, almost physical. I went to the guest room, the one I'd always stayed in, and set my bag on the bed. Everything was exactly as it had been the last time I visited. A book sat on the nightstand, my bookmark still halfway through. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the quilt to my chest, and for the first time all night, I let the tears come. When exhaustion finally dragged me under, I slept fully dressed, the quilt pulled tight around me, the faint hum of the house the only comfort in the hollow quiet. Morning came in a wash of pale light through the guest room curtains. For a few seconds, waking felt normal, the kind of soft, slow rise into the day I used to have when visiting my grandparents. Then the memories of the night before pushed in like cold air under a door. I sat up, the quilt still wrapped around me, and listened. No sound of coffee brewing in the kitchen. No faint off-key whistling from my grandfather. Just silence. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with missed calls and texts. Most were from my parents, alternating between threats and syrupy attempts at reconciliation. Ryan had sent one line that made my stomach clench. "Enjoy the big empty house while you can. Not for long." A knock at the front door made me flinch. I froze, the phone still in my hand. Another knock, softer this time, followed by a voice. "Miss Claire, it's Victor." I exhaled slowly and opened the door to find Victor Alvarez, my grandparents' estate manager and handyman for the last 15 years. His weathered face softened when he saw me. "I'm so sorry about George and Margaret. They were the best people I ever worked for." "Thank you," I said quietly. "It still doesn't feel real." He stepped inside, his boots leaving faint marks on the entry rug. "Your grandparents asked me to look after you if anything happened to them. I've been keeping the house and grounds in order. And I've been watching the cameras." My head tilted. "Cameras? New system your grandfather had me install last year." "He didn't trust the old one your father set up." Victor's expression darkened. "It records everything, inside and out. After the funeral, your father and Ryan came here when no one was around. They took things, jewelry, watches, a few electronics. I have all of it on video." A slow, cold anger began to form in my chest. "You still have the footage?" He nodded. "Backed up to a secure cloud account. They can't touch it." I gestured toward the kitchen. "Come in. I think we should talk." Over mugs of coffee, Victor told me things my grandparents had never shared. About the arguments over money, the business deals my father had tried to force through the company, and the times he'd shown up demanding cash for emergencies that were anything but. Then he mentioned something that made me sit up straighter. Mrs. Whitman kept journals. Every year, leather-bound, on a shelf in her study. She wrote down everything. If your family ever tries to contest the will, those journals, they'll tell the real story. I followed him down the hall to my grandmother's study. The air faintly scented with lavender. A built-in bookshelf lined the wall, each shelf perfectly neat. Victor pulled down a volume, the gold-stamped year catching the light. I opened it and immediately recognized her looping handwriting. May 15th. Edward visited today for the first time in 7 months. Didn't ask about our health. Launched straight into a pitch about a cryptocurrency investment requiring $250,000. George refused. Edward accused us of preferring Claire. Said she only visits to secure her inheritance. Completely untrue. Claire has never asked us for money and doesn't even know our net worth. My throat tightened as I read entry after entry. Stories of my father's bitterness, my aunt's thinly veiled insults, Ryan's absurd business plans, and my mother's embarrassment over their modest lifestyle. In contrast, her notes about my visits were warm and full of detail. What we cooked together, the books I'd brought her, the afternoons we spent in the garden. We were still in the study when the doorbell rang. Victor checked the front window, then turned to me. "It's Helen Moore. She was your grandparents' housekeeper for 20 years. I went to greet her." Helen was small and brisk, her gray hair neatly pinned back. She stepped inside and pulled me into a brief but firm hug. "You look just like Margaret when she was your age," she said. "She was so proud of you." Helen had brought a paper bag with a still warm loaf of bread inside. "You need to eat. And I need to tell you something." In the kitchen, she set the bread on the counter and lowered her voice. "I was here the day of the funeral, before the reception. Your mother went straight into Margaret's jewelry box. Took several pieces. Said Margaret would have wanted her to have them. I didn't say anything at the time, but I couldn't keep it to myself." Victor and I exchanged a glance. More theft. More proof. Helen reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "Margaret told me to give this to you if things ever got difficult." Inside was a single sheet of paper in my grandmother's handwriting. "Claire, if they turn on you, go to Samuel immediately. Trust the people we've trusted. They will protect you, and they will protect what we've built." Before I could process it, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Ryan. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. we're all coming to collect what's ours. Don't try to stop us." I showed it to Victor and Helen. Victor's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better be ready." Called Samuel immediately. He answered on the second ring. His voice calm but clipped, as if he had been expecting my call. "They're coming tomorrow morning," I said. "All of them." Ryan's message made it sound like a threat. "I see," Samuel replied, and there was a faint rustle of papers in the background. "Then it's time to move to the next phase of your grandparents' plan." Claire listened carefully. They knew this would happen, and they made arrangements. "We'll need to act quickly." He told me to stay in the house, not to answer the door for anyone until he arrived, and to gather any evidence we already had. Victor brought the journal we had found, while Helen went to the study to start checking for more hidden documents. By late afternoon, the dining table was covered in proof. My grandmother's detailed journals, receipts, copies of letters, photographs, and a USB drive with the security footage Victor had mentioned. Each piece felt heavier than paper or metal. It was the weight of years of truth my grandparents had quietly collected. A knock at the back door startled me, but Victor was already on his feet. "It's Patricia Lee," he said. "Your grandparents' business partner." Patricia was a tall woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed but warm. She stepped into the kitchen carrying a slim laptop case. "I got Samuel's call," she said. "I've brought the company records. Loans your father never repaid. Property he tried to move under his own name, all of it. And there's something else." She opened her laptop on the dining table and began pulling up documents. "George and Margaret asked me to ensure the profit-sharing program at Whitman Logistics stayed intact after they were gone. I have emails from your father trying to dismantle it. That alone would have destroyed employee trust in the company." My stomach turned as she scrolled through messages, each one more damning than the last. I had known my father could be manipulative, but the sheer arrogance in his words was still a shock. Before we could digest it all, the front doorbell rang. Helen peered through the side window. "It's Daniel Cho, their financial advisor." Daniel, a quiet man in a dark suit, carried two heavy folders. "Investment portfolios, bank statements, proof of charitable donations," he said as he set them down. "Your grandparents wanted every asset accounted for, every intention documented. Claire, they trusted you with this because they knew you'd guard it the way they did." The evening turned into a steady stream of arrivals. Sarah, the neighbor from across the street, came with a homemade casserole and a list of dates she'd seen my parents visiting, usually after long absences and almost always leaving with something in their hands. George Patel, who had been a foreman at Whitman Logistics for over 20 years, stopped by with signed statements from employees about my grandparents' integrity and my father's absence from the company's real work. Each person brought not only information but also a kind of quiet solidarity, a reminder that my grandparents' true family extended far beyond blood. As the house filled with a low murmur of voices, I felt something shift inside me. The fear from earlier was still there, but it was being joined by something sturdier. Resolve. When Samuel arrived just before 9, the dining table was nearly covered edge to edge with organized stacks of evidence. He took one slow look around the room, then nodded. Good. This will be more than enough. He pulled out a separate folder and handed it to me. Restraining orders, ready to file if they become aggressive. Cease and desist letters responding to the threats. And a statement from Judge William Turner, who has agreed to be here tomorrow as a neutral witness. I looked up sharply. A judge. Here. Yes, Samuel said simply. Your grandparents asked him years ago if he'd be willing to intervene if things got ugly. He was their friend for decades. He said yes without hesitation. He then turned to Patricia. You'll present the company evidence. Daniel, you'll handle the financials. Victor, you'll confirm the footage is authentic and time-stamped. Helen, you'll testify about the jewelry and the letter. Sarah, you'll provide your witness account of visits and removals. Everyone else will stand as character witnesses. The plan was coming together like clockwork, but a part of me still braced for what tomorrow would bring. My family didn't back down easily, especially when they thought money was at stake. Samuel must have read the worry on my face. Claire, you're not walking into this alone. Tomorrow they'll see exactly how prepared we are. And they'll see that your grandparents left you more than an inheritance. They left you a fortress. We stayed up past midnight, reviewing every detail, making sure the evidence was airtight. By the time the last person left, the house felt different, less like an empty echo of what it had been, more like a command center. As I climbed into bed, the rain began again outside, steady and unrelenting. I stared at the ceiling, knowing that in less than 10 hours they would come. And this time they wouldn't find me unprepared. I woke before sunrise, the house still and shadowed in the pale blue light of early morning. For a few moments I simply listened, to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the hallway clock, the quiet sigh of the wind outside. It was the calm before the storm, and I could feel it in my bones. By 7, I was dressed and in the kitchen with Helen, who was already moving between the stove and the counter like she had done here for years. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee drifted through the house. You need to eat something, she said without looking up from the skillet. You'll think clearer. Samuel arrived just before 8, a thick folder under his arm and his usual composed expression. Everyone in position, he said, placing the folder on the dining table. Once they're here, we stick to the plan. No raised voices, no losing our temper. Let the evidence speak. Victor stationed himself near the front door, a silent but solid presence. Patricia set up her laptop at the head of the dining table, the screen angled toward where my family would sit. Daniel laid out the financial records in precise stacks. Sarah sat near the kitchen, her notes in a tidy spiral-bound notebook. By 9:30, the house felt different. Full but orderly, ready. At 9:45, headlights swept across the driveway. I moved to the window in the hallway and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. First came my father's black luxury sedan, then my mother's white SUV, followed by Elaine and Martin's bright red convertible, and finally Ryan's low-slung sports car. They parked in a staggered line like a formation, and for a moment no one got out. Then the doors opened almost in unison. They walked toward the house together, my father in front, his face set in that familiar mask of control. My mother's chin was tilted slightly upward, eyes scanning the house as though she owned it. Elaine was already talking, her hands moving sharply in the air. Ryan had his hands in his pockets, But the smirk was there. The doorbell rang twice, followed by loud, impatient knocking. Victor glanced at me. I nodded. He opened the door just enough to stand in their way. "Miss Whitman is expecting you," he said, his tone polite but unyielding. "Please come in." They filed into the foyer, only to stop short when they saw the people assembled in the living room and dining area. My father's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" I stepped forward, my voice steady. "These are people who knew George and Margaret better than anyone. People who understand exactly what they wanted. And they're here as witnesses." Before my family could respond, the front door opened again. Judge William Turner entered, followed by Chief Angela Rivers. The judge's presence drew visible tension from my father's face. He knew exactly who he was dealing with. "Good morning," the judge said evenly. "I'm here at the request of George and Margaret Whitman, to ensure that today's discussion remains civil and that their wishes are respected." My mother's voice was sharp. "This is a private family matter. Why is law enforcement here?" Chief Rivers gave a small, cool smile. "I'm here as a friend. Unless someone decides to break the law. Then I'm here officially." The message was clear. Samuel stepped up beside me. "Shall we begin?" We all moved into the dining room, my family on one side of the table, our witnesses and allies on the other. The air was heavy, charged with something more than anger. It was expectation, confrontation waiting to ignite. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "We're here to settle this nonsense. My parents were manipulated. We're simply correcting that mistake." Patricia opened her laptop. "If that's the case, perhaps you can explain these," she said, clicking through files. Emails appeared on the screen. Requests for large sums of money, attempts to transfer property deeds, proposals to dismantle company programs that had been in place for decades. "Taken out of context," my father said quickly. Daniel slid a folder across the table. "Here's more context. Complete financial records. Loans never repaid. Forged signatures. Every time your parents tried to help you, you found a way to take more." Elaine bristled. "This is ridiculous. You think a few papers prove anything?" Judge Turner cleared his throat. "I've reviewed video journals kept by Margaret Whitman. The pattern is clear, and it matches everything presented here." Ryan leaned forward. "Video journals. What about the fact that Claire's just a teacher? She can't manage all this. She's going to waste it." Victor spoke for the first time. "Mr. Whitman, your grandparents trusted her because she never came here with her hand out. Unlike you." The words landed like a blow, and the smirk slipped from Ryan's face. I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. "You're not here because you care about George and Margaret's legacy. You're here because you think you can take what they left me. But you can't. Their wishes are protected, documented, and witnessed." My father's mouth tightened. "We'll see about that." Samuel opened his folder and began sliding thick envelopes toward each of them. "Before you decide on your next step, you should know these contain evidence that will become public record if you contest the will. I suggest you read them carefully." They looked down at the envelopes, and for the first time since they arrived, no one spoke. The sound of paper tearing was the only noise in the room as my family opened the envelopes. My father was first, ripping his open with a single impatient motion. He scanned the first page, and I saw the shift immediately. His confident expression faltered, the lines around his mouth tightening. My mother followed, flipping through her stack of documents. Her eyes darted back and forth, and her lips parted just slightly. Ryan was slower. His envelope held loosely in one hand as he pulled the pages out with the other. The moment he saw the printed screenshot of a text message, his own words, his jaw clenched. Elaine skimmed hers with a sharp, jerky motion, her gaze snapping up to me halfway through. "You had someone spying on us," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of outrage and something closer to fear. Samuel's voice was calm. "No one was spying on you. George and Margaret documented their own lives. Every visit, every conversation, every request. These are their words, their recordings, their notes. Patricia clicked her laptop, and the large screen in the dining room came to life. And this, she said, is the footage from the security system installed last year. The first clip showed my father and Ryan entering the house 2 days after the funeral. They moved through the rooms with practiced familiarity. My father going to the study, Ryan heading upstairs. The next clip was clear. My father slipping a watch into his pocket, Ryan tucking a small jewelry box into his jacket. The time and date stamps glowed in the corner of the screen. Fabricated, my father said quickly, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Victor spoke from the corner, his tone even. The footage is stored in a secure cloud account. Multiple backups. I set it up myself. Elaine's voice rose. This is twisted. You're all ganging up on us because Claire is your golden girl. Judge Turner leaned forward, his gaze steady on her. Mrs. Carter, this is not about favoritism. It's about honoring the wishes of the deceased. And what's been presented here is more than enough to hold up in court. My mother placed her pages face down on the table, her eyes on me. You're really going to go through with this? Cut us out completely. Kept my voice level. This isn't my decision. It was theirs. I'm just making sure it stands. Ryan shoved his papers back into the envelope, the edges crumpling. You think you've won. But money runs out. And when it does, you'll have nothing. Samuel's expression didn't change. You're free to leave. Or if you prefer, I can have Chief Rivers arrange for a formal statement regarding the threats you've made. Chief Rivers, who had been silent until now, rested her hand on the table. That might be wise. Some of the messages we've seen could qualify as harassment, even criminal intimidation. Ryan looked away. Martin, who had stayed quiet the entire time, finally spoke, his voice low. Elaine, maybe we should go. She turned to him, eyes flashing, but whatever she saw in his face made her mouth snap shut. My father stood, sliding his envelope toward him as if he might change his mind once he reread it. This isn't over, he said, his tone flat. Samuel didn't flinch. It is, Richard. Legally, it is. One by one they left the table. The sound of the front door opening and closing echoed in the stillness. I watched from the window as they walked back to their cars in silence, their tight formation broken. When the last engine started and the final taillights disappeared down the driveway, I turned back to the dining room. The tension in the air had thinned, but the weight of what had just happened still pressed on my shoulders. Patricia closed her laptop. They won't stop thinking about what they lost. But they also won't risk exposing themselves to the public. Your grandparents made sure of that. Victor began gathering the documents, stacking them neatly. You did well, Claire. I wasn't sure if it felt like a victory yet. But for the first time since the will reading, I knew the worst of the storm had passed. The house felt eerily still after they left, as if the air itself had exhaled. 4 hours, tension had coiled through every room. A sharp, invisible wire pulled tight. Now there was space again, but the quiet wasn't entirely comforting. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, when you're not sure if the worst is truly over. Helen moved through the dining room, clearing empty coffee cups and untouched pastries. The clink of porcelain against the tray was the only sound until Samuel spoke. Claire, he said, you should take some time to breathe. Today was a turning point. They came here ready to break you, and instead they walked away with no ground to stand on. I nodded, though my mind felt crowded. The evidence had been overwhelming. Every page, every clip, every journal entry. But I knew my family's resentment wouldn't vanish just because the law was against them. Patricia packed up her laptop, tucking it into its leather case. I'll hold on to the company records for now. If they try to approach Whitman Logistics through back channels, I'll hear about it first. Daniel gathered the financial folders, sliding them into a briefcase. Your portfolio is stable, diversified. We'll keep everything secure and in line with your grandparents' long-term strategy. No sudden moves, no flashy spending. That will make it harder for them to claim you're mismanaging anything. Victor lingered near the window, his eyes scanning the driveway even though the last car had left 20 minutes ago. I'll keep the security system armed at all times. No one steps onto this property without being recorded from now on. Sarah brought over her notebook. I'll give these dates and observations to Samuel. It might seem like overkill, but if they ever try to twist the narrative in the court of public opinion, you'll have witness accounts. I looked at each of them. People who didn't owe me anything but had shown up anyway. My grandparents had chosen them carefully, trusted them deeply. It struck me again how much thought George and Margaret had put into protecting not just their legacy, but me. By late afternoon, most of them had gone, promising to return if needed. Only Helen and Victor remained. Helen insisted on making dinner, filling the kitchen with the scent of roasting chicken and rosemary. Victor fixed a sticking drawer in the study, then checked the locks on every window and door. When evening came, I sat in the living room with a plate balanced on my knees. Outside, the rain had started again, a soft, steady rhythm against the glass. The lamp beside me cast a warm pool of light, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt a flicker of safety. But safety wasn't the same as peace. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but the chime of a new message came seconds later. You think this is over? It's not. No name, no number showing. But I didn't need to guess who had sent it. The tone was pure Ryan. I forwarded the message to Samuel with a short note. Came in just now. Within a minute, he replied. Documented. Ignore unless they escalate. They've already lost Claire. All they can do now is flail. I set the phone down and tried to focus on the sound of the rain. Helen came in from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea. Your grandparents used to sit right here in the evenings, she said softly, handing me one. George would read the paper, Margaret would do her crosswords. They were happiest in the quiet moments. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat sink into my palms. I want to keep this house like that, I said. Not full of shouting and threats. Just calm. Victor appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. Then that's what we'll do. They can rage all they want outside these walls, but in here, you're in control. Later, after they'd gone for the night, I walked through the house room by room. The study smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet my grandmother kept in the desk drawer. The kitchen gleamed in the low light, the counters bare except for the loaf of bread Helen had brought yesterday. Upstairs, the guest room waited with the quilt still rumpled from the night before, but my steps carried me toward the master bedroom. I opened the door slowly. The room was exactly as they'd left it. The bed neatly made, my grandfather's watch on the dresser, my grandmother's reading glasses resting on the nightstand. The quiet was different here, heavier somehow. I didn't climb into their bed that night. Instead, I sat in the armchair by the window, looking out over the darkened lawn. The house wasn't just mine now. It was my responsibility in every sense. And as the rain continued to fall, I promised myself I would not let it become a prize for people who had never cared about the lives lived within its walls. 3 days passed without another in-person confrontation, but the silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like they were circling, waiting for the right moment to lunge again. I didn't have to guess. They were predictable when they wanted something. The first attempt came from my mother. Text mid-morning as if nothing had happened. Darling, we've been thinking. It's silly for us to be apart like this. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Just us, no tension. The kind of message that might have worked on me years ago, when I still believed that moments of warmth meant things could change. I typed a short reply. I'll consider spending time together if we can agree on boundaries. No discussions about the estate, the will, or money. I knew it would end the conversation before it began. 10 minutes later, her answer came. You've changed. The second came from Ryan, less subtle. Have a project I'm working on that could triple your investment in a year. You should at least hear me out before someone else takes the opportunity. I didn't respond. The read receipt alone would be enough to irritate him. Elaine waited until Sunday afternoon to make her move, calling the house phone. Her voice was sugary, but the sharp edge beneath it was impossible to miss. Claire, family should be together, especially family with a big house, perfect for hosting the holidays. We could bring everyone here. It would be like old times. Old times was a strange way to describe years of strained dinners and whispered arguments. I told her I'd think about it, which was my polite way of saying no. I relayed each of these contacts to Samuel, who advised documenting everything, no matter how small. They're testing you, he said, trying to see if they can get their foot back in the door. Once you let them in, they'll push the boundaries until they're gone. So I stayed busy. Patricia met me at Whitman Logistics to walk me through the business operations. The main office was buzzing with activity. Dispatchers routing deliveries, warehouse teams moving shipments, drivers coming in from their routes. Every person who stopped to shake my hand spoke with respect for George and Margaret, and with curiosity about me. They'll be watching to see if you honor the way your grandparents ran things, Patricia told me as we walked the floor. Profit was important, but people mattered more. Keep that balance, and they'll stand with you. Back at the house, Helen began helping me sort through my grandparents' personal files. We found letters they'd written to scholarship recipients, receipts for medical bills they'd quietly covered for neighbors, even a handwritten note from my grandfather outlining his vision for a community education fund. That's when the idea began to take shape, turning their values into something living. I called Samuel that evening. I want to set up the foundation now, I said. Not next year, not when things calm down. Now. By the next day, we were sitting in his office with the paperwork spread between us. The George and Margaret Whitman Foundation, I said aloud, testing the sound of it. Mission: to provide scholarships, vocational training, and resources for underfunded schools in the community. Samuel nodded. It's exactly what they would have wanted. News of the foundation moved fast. Within a week, I started receiving letters. Teachers requesting supplies, parents asking about scholarships, local leaders offering to partner on community programs. And with that attention came the next ripple from my family. My mother called again, her tone suddenly warm. I heard about the foundation. It's wonderful. You know, I have connections that could help with fundraising. Maybe I could serve on the board. It's not a public board, I said simply. The trustees were chosen before it launched. There was a pause on the line before she replied. You're shutting us out completely. You did that yourselves, I answered. After the call, I sat in the kitchen with a mug of tea, the late afternoon light spilling across the table. I thought about the people who had stood in this house with me the day my family tried to break in. Their faces, their steady voices, their refusal to let me be cornered. They were the Real board, the ones who would help me protect and grow what my grandparents had left. As the sun dipped lower, the phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Ryan. Enjoy your little charity project. Let's see how long you can keep it afloat without real business sense. I set the phone face down and let the comment roll off me. They could snipe from a distance all they wanted. I had work to do. And for the first time since the reading of the will, I felt like the future was something I could shape, not something I had to defend. The morning of the foundation's first event dawned clear and cool, the kind of crisp autumn day my grandmother had loved. The lawn was still damp with dew as vendors set up tables beneath white canopies in the yard. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the refreshment stand, mingling with the scent of flowers arranged in tall glass vases along the entryway. Inside, the dining room table, once stacked with evidence to defend my inheritance, was now covered in neatly printed programs and name tags. Each bore the name of a scholarship recipient or a community partner. Helen moved briskly between the kitchen and the back patio, her hands full of platters, her voice low but cheerful as she directed the catering staff. Victor stood near the driveway, helping guests with parking and greeting them with the ease of someone who belonged to this house as much as I did. Samuel arrived early, dressed in a dark suit, his expression proud but composed. You've done it, Claire, he said, handing me a folder. Today is the first visible step in making your grandparents' vision real. Patricia and Daniel came together, arms full of donation envelopes and sign-up sheets. They set up a registration area just inside the front door, their energy calm and efficient. By 10 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. Teachers from local schools, parents holding the hands of nervous teenagers, small business owners from the community. Their faces carried a mix of curiosity and hope. I stood at the entryway, shaking hands, greeting each person, trying to remember every name. The stories came in quick succession. A high school senior who dreamed of becoming a nurse, a young man hoping to train as a welder, a teacher whose classroom had been without new books for years. Midway through the morning, I stepped onto the small stage set up under the largest canopy. The crowd fell into a quiet hum as I adjusted the microphone. "Thank you for being here," I began. "This foundation exists because of two people, George and Margaret Whitman, who believe that success means nothing unless it's used to lift others. They taught me that wealth is a tool, not a goal. And today we get to use that tool to change lives." Behind me, a long table held 20 envelopes, each containing the first official scholarship award. I called each recipient's name, watching as they stepped forward to accept their letter, some with steady hands, others trembling with emotion. When the last student had been called, the crowd applauded, a warm, rising sound that filled the cool air. From the edge of the crowd I caught sight of them, my family. My mother, standing stiffly with her arms crossed. My father, his jaw set in that way it did when he was calculating something. Ryan, leaning against a tree, his expression unreadable. Elaine, whispering something to Martin. They hadn't been invited, but I wasn't surprised they'd come to watch. I didn't acknowledge them. This day wasn't about them. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She had dark hair pulled into a neat braid, her scholarship envelope clutched to her chest. "I'm Sofia Delgado," she said. "My parents both work 2 jobs. No one in my family has ever gone to college. This changes everything." I felt the sting of tears in my eyes. "Make the most of it," I told her. "And when you can, pass it on to someone else." As the afternoon wound down, guests lingered in the yard, talking and laughing. The house was filled with a low hum of conversation, the smell of coffee and baked goods, the sound of footsteps on wood floors. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the scene. For the first time, the house felt alive again, not as a fortress under siege, but as the center of something good, something worth fighting for. When the last guest left and the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I walked through the quiet rooms, my hand trailing along the familiar furniture. In the study, the journals remained on the shelf, a silent reminder of the path that had brought me here. My grandparents had left me more than money. They had left me purpose, community, and a way to keep them alive in every act of generosity. And that, I realized, could never be taken away.